Tonight, on Games Lore to Sleep, we drift back to a time before the Erdtree's golden light, before grace, before the world was split into radiant order and lurking shadow, a land forgotten whispers in the dark, where the crucible once shaped life into horns, wings, and spirals, where Queen Marika rose from the ashes of her own suffering, where she hid her past and sealed it away beneath gold's gaze, and there her son Messmer, born with a living, cursed flame, was cast upon a crusade, not to save but to purge. Cities crumbled into ash, faith was shattered, an entire land was erased from memory. Yet, far beyond the fires, Miquella quietly wove a plan to remake existence itself in ways the world could not yet imagine. This is not a tale of heroes. It is a story of gods, of secrets, and of what hides in shadow when light shines too bright. So dim your lights, settle in. If you love slow, immersive game lore, like the video, subscribe to Games Lore to Sleep, and tell me in the comments where you're drifting off from tonight. It is always comforting to know who else is falling asleep with these calm, immersive tales. Now, close your eyes and let us descend gently into the land of shadow. Before the Erdtree cast its golden light across the lands between, before order was defined, named, and enforced, before grace guided the steps of kings and champions, there existed a land shaped by something older. A land where life did not yet flow through a single radiant source, but instead emerged from a tangled primordial force, a blending of forms, instincts, and beginnings. This place would one day be known as the Land of Shadow. But it was not born in shadow. Once it stood fully beneath the sky, open, wild, untamed. In that distant age, long before Queen Marika's rise, the power known as the Crucible flourished here. Not as doctrine, not as law, not as scripture carved into stone, but as nature itself. The Crucible was not orderly. It did not divide, it did not separate beast from man, or flesh from spirit. It simply allowed life to become. And life became everything. Horns pushed through skin without shame, wings unfurled from backs never meant to fly. Scales hardened across shoulders, tails, claws, and strange eyes emerged as easily as breath. There was no concept of impurity. No one called these changes curses. They were proof. Proof that life was still close to its source. Raw, unfiltered, sacred. And in this land such traits were not feared. Among them were the people later known as the Hornsent, a civilization shaped not by rejection of the primal, but by its celebration. To them, horns were not deformities. They were blessings, a visible mark that the Crucible had touched you, shaped you, chosen you. The larger the horns, the greater the honor. Children born without them prayed for growth. Warriors carved horned shapes into their helms. Priests wore crowns fashioned from bone and antler. Animals bore horns regardless of species. Spirits carried them even after death, and humans too grew these marks of vitality like branches reaching toward heaven. This was not corruption. This was holiness. The land itself reflected this belief. Roots split the earth like veins. Ancient trees twisted into spirals as they grew. Stone outcroppings curled upward, as if pulled by invisible currents. Nothing here grew straight. Structures spiraled toward the sky, not as simple towers, but as symbols. Spirals carved into stone, etched into armor, woven into prayer cloth, tattooed onto flesh. The spiral was sacred. It represented ascent, movement, a current carrying life upward toward the divine. To the Hornsent, the Crucible was not merely a tree or a place. It was a rising force, a tide that lifted all living things, and so they built their holy places, where this current felt strongest, at sites where the air hummed, where lightning gathered without clouds, where the boundary between mortal and divine seemed thin enough to pierce. One such place would later be called Enir Ilim. Even in those ancient days it stood tall, Not quite a city, not quite a temple. Something between the two. A towering convergence of stone and faith that stretched impossibly high, its upper reaches lost to mist and stormlight. Pilgrims climbed its winding paths for days. Some said the air grew thin near the top. Others claimed they could hear voices whispering from above. At its peak stood something more than architecture, a threshold, a gate, the gate of divinity. Silent, dormant, waiting. Not every culture understood its purpose, but all felt its gravity. Kings made offerings before it, warriors swore oaths, priests knelt and wept. Some believed it was a door for the gods to descend, others believed it was a path for mortals to ascend. Either way, it promised one thing: transcendence, and that promise shaped everything. Yet this land was never gentle. It was not peaceful. It was alive. Storms rolled constantly across the sky, drawn to the crucible's power like iron to a magnet. Thunder cracked without warning. Rain fell warm and heavy, thick with the scent of soil and blood. Divine birds were worshipped as manifestations of this force, vast golden creatures whose wings sparked lightning as they soared between earth and heaven. Their cries echoed like trumpets. Their shadows blanketed entire valleys. Warriors trained to emulate them. They adorned themselves with feathers and talons. They leapt from cliffs in ritual dives. They called down storms with drums and dance. Battle itself became a form of prayer. Over generations, these practices evolved. Divine bird warriors became horned warriors. Horned warriors became divine beast dancers. Masks grew larger, costumes heavier, movements more frenzied, until the line between man and beast blurred completely. Each step brought them closer, they believed, to the gods above. But power, even when revered, invites conflict. Strength demands hierarchy, faith demands enemies. Not all who lived in the land of shadow were honored equally. Among the Haunted lived another people, the shamans. They were different, long-lived, quiet, soft-spoken. They did not grow horns as proudly. Their bodies seemed strangely malleable, their flesh unusually receptive to change. They practiced subtler rites, healing, binding, communion with spirits. Some whispered that their blood remembered something older than the crucible itself, something deeper, and that frightened the Haunted. Because if the crucible was the source of all life, then what were the shamans connected to? Their flesh, it was said, melded harmoniously with others, bodies joined without rejection, wounds fused closed. First, this was seen as a gift, then an opportunity, then a resource. The Haunted believed themselves chosen. Anything that challenged that belief, anything that suggested another path to divinity, became dangerous. Slowly, reverence turned to suspicion. Suspicion turned to fear. Fear turned to persecution. The shamans were branded, whipped, bound in ropes of woven bone. Their bodies were forced into rituals meant to imitate the crucible, stuffed together into living jars, compressed into grotesque amalgamations of flesh and prayer. A cruel mimicry of unity, a blasphemous recreation of life's origin. To the Haunted, this punishment was not cruelty. It was sanctification. They told themselves the shamans were being returned to the source. But the jars did not sing. They screamed. And for the first time in that ancient land, the crucible's blessings began to feel like suffering. Something had shifted. The air grew heavier. The storms more violent. The spirals in stone cracked like broken shells. And far beyond the land of shadow, beyond its storms, beyond its old faiths, a new power was beginning to stir, not wild, not chaotic, but deliberate, measured, radiant, a vision of order, a vision of gold, a promise that life could be controlled, shaped, perfected. No horns, no beasts, no tangled beginnings, only clarity, only hierarchy, only grace. And somewhere, quietly, that vision chose its vessel. A woman. long before she was called a goddess, before her name was carved into stone and spoken with reverence or fear, before statues rose in her likeness and kingdoms bent the knee. Marika was simply one of the people who lived in the land of shadow. This was where her story began. Not in a palace, not in prophecy, but in quiet. Hidden among low meadows and ancient twisting trees lay a small settlement. A village later remembered only in fragments, its name worn away by time, its paths reclaimed by moss and root. A place touched, not by conquest, but by stillness, the village of the shamans. Here the air was softer, the wind slower. Even the storms that ravaged the wider land seemed to weaken before reaching its borders. It was a place that endured rather than expanded. Here Marika lived among those who were different, long-lived, rarely born, bound not by ambition, but by memory. The shamans carried their past carefully. Stories were not written, they were spoken, repeated, guarded. Each generation taught the next not how to rule, but how to survive. They did not worship the crucible as the Hornson did. They did not celebrate horns or feathers or transformation. They did not seek divinity through violence. Their practices were quieter, more inward. They healed the wounded with slow chants and warm hands. They bound spirits to rest. They listened to the earth like one listens to breathing, where the Hornson demanded strength. The shamans practiced patience. Where others sought ascent, they sought harmony. And because they were different, they were feared. Difference unsettles certainty, and the Hornson had built their entire world on certainty. As their culture hardened into doctrine, as priests spoke more boldly of chosen blood and divine right, the shamans became an inconvenience, a contradiction. If the crucible blessed only the horned and the fierce, then what were these gentle, long-lived people? Why did their bodies endure illness? Why did their flesh join without rejection? Why did spirits answer their voices? Questions like these do not linger long in societies built on faith. They are erased. Slowly the visit stopped. Trade faded. Paths grew empty. Then came the accusations. Then the chains. The shamans were branded bound, dragged from their homes beneath a sky that refused to look away. Their bodies were turned into vessels, forced together in grotesque rituals that echoed the crucible's ancient unity. But stripped of its grace, flesh pressed to flesh, bone to bone. Life blended without consent, living jars. A mockery of the force that once connected all things. The Hornson called it sacred, called it purification, but sanctity built on screams is still cruelty. It is here, among this suffering, that Marika's faith in the old world began to fracture. She watched, she remembered, she endured. Perhaps she hid, perhaps she simply survived when others did not. History does not say. But something in her hardened, not like stone, like gold in a furnace, soft at first, then unbreakable, and even then, gold followed her. In the ruins of her village long after its people were gone, a gentle incantation remained, a small illusion of an Erdtree, not the towering symbol of order yet to come, but something fragile, faint like candlelight. It gave no commands, offered no laws. It simply glowed, warm, kind. It is said Marika bathed her home in gold, letting that light pool across broken floors and empty doorways. Knowing full well there was no one left to heal, this was not triumph, it was mourning, an apology whispered to ghosts, and perhaps resolve. Near this village stood something else, ancient ruins shaped like fingers reaching skyward. Stone columns split into two prongs, weathered, half-buried, places most would pass without understanding. But Marika did not pass. She listened. The two fingers were not distant gods. They had presence, weight, a will that pressed gently against the mind, like a tide against shore. They did not speak in words. They spoke in impressions, in inevitabilities. They chose, they guided, they promised. America, like others before and after her, was named an Empyrean, a candidate for godhood, not because she was strongest, not because she was pure, but because she could become something else, something greater, or perhaps something useful. What the fingers offered was not peace. It was structure, a vision of a world bound to a single source of life. One tree, one order, one truth. No chaotic blessings, no tangled forms, no suffering born from randomness. Everything categorized, everything governed, everything eternal. To someone who had watched her people ground into jars, order must have sounded like mercy. At the center of that vision was a seed, small, unremarkable, yet impossibly heavy with meaning. The seed of the Erdtree, a promise that life itself could be rewritten. But becoming a god required more than guidance. It required a threshold. At the heart of Ynir Elim, the spiraling tower built by the Hornsent, stood the gate of divinity, older than their faith, older than their wars, a place where something impossible had once occurred, where mortals crossed into myth. How Marika reached it remains shrouded in silence. Some say she climbed alone. Some say the fingers led her, some whisper of blood spilled on stone. What she did there survives only in fragments. A seduction, a betrayal, a sin that would reshape the world. Perhaps she promised the Hornsent salvation. Perhaps she deceived them. Perhaps she simply used what they had built for their own gods. She offered something precious, a braid of her own golden hair, a vow, a sacrifice, a prayer left unanswered. And then she did not return. For a time there was only wind, only storm, only the slow turning of the world. Then, gold. Light burst outward like dawn forced into being. Roots spread across reality itself. Branches pierced heaven. The Erdtree was born, a radiant axis of life, order, and grace. Its glow washed the world clean, or so it seemed. But nothing created imbalance stands alone. Where light gathers, shadow forms. And alongside the Erdtree's brilliance, something else took shape. The Scadutree. Twisted, dark, heavy with everything the new order refused to carry. Death, disorder, memory, all that did not fit the shape of perfection, all that gold denied. The land of shadow became their resting place, severed, hidden, pushed behind reality like unwanted history. The old land, the old faith, the old suffering, buried. And in that moment, Marika was no longer a daughter of the shamans, no longer the girl who walked mossy paths or listened to quiet songs. She was a goddess, radiant, distant, untouchable. But gods are not born empty. They carry everything they once were, every memory, every grief, every scar, and gods do not leave their past untouched. Sometimes they erase it. When the Erdtree rose into the sky, its light did not simply illuminate the world. It divided it. At first, the change felt gentle, a dawn that never quite faded, a warmth that lingered in the air, a glow that made even stone seem alive. Gold flowed outward, through roots, through grace, through life itself, binding the lands between to a single radiant order. Grace threaded through warriors and wanderers alike, through beasts, through soil, through the very air people breathed. Everything touched by that light became part of a system, named, categorized, given purpose. Birth had meaning, death had definition, souls had destinations. It was beautiful, it was comfort, it was absolute. But absolutes always have edges, and what could not exist within that order did not disappear. It was cast aside, because nothing is ever truly erased, only displaced. The Scadutree was born at the same moment as the Erdtree, not later, not accidentally, not as some forgotten afterthought, but as its counterpart. Where the Erdtree rose straight and radiant, the Scadutree twisted, where one reached confidently toward heaven. The other coiled inward like a wounded limb. Where gold promised clarity, shadow gathered everything unclear. Life creates contrast simply by existing. Light demands shadow, structure demands rejection. And so the Scadutree became the vessel for everything the Erdtree would not hold. Death, decay, memory, things without place. It grew crooked, knotted, brittle bark splitting like old scars. Its branches tangled around themselves as if unsure which way was sky. A tree that did not ascend, only endured. A shadow that could not stand upright beneath gold's gaze. And with its birth, the land of shadow changed. No longer merely a land shaped by ancient cultures or forgotten wars, it became something else entirely. A sink, a gathering place, a quiet gravity well pulling downward all that the Erdtree rejected. Not destroyed, not forgotten, just displaced. All manners of death were drawn there. Spirits drifted across its plains like pale mist, unable to find rest. Graves rose from the soil itself, as though the earth were exhaling bones. Weapons rusted in days. Flowers bloomed and withered in the same breath. Even the corpses of fallen dragons, vast ancient things that should have become legend, found their way into its domain, their skeletons scattered across ravines like broken monuments. This was not coincidence. It was design. The rune of death had been removed from the Golden Order. Destined death, severed, locked away. But eternity has a cost, because if nothing truly ends, where do the endings go? They cannot simply vanish. They must collect somewhere. And so death was suppressed, not destroyed, within the shadowed realm. Every denied ending slid quietly sideways into this place. Like water diverted from a river, the land of shadow became a mirror, a reflection of what gold denied. For every radiant blessing in the lands between, there was an echo here. For every life extended unnaturally long, another spirit wandered restlessly in the dark. For every glorious victory sung beneath the Erdtree, there was a battlefield here that never stopped mourning. If the lands between was the story Marika wished the world to see, the land of shadow was everything edited out. And yet, this land was not always separate. Once it shared the same sky, the same winds. Mountains aligned cleanly across the horizon. Peaks overlapped like puzzle pieces. Paths existed that could simply be walked. Travelers could have crossed from one to the other without noticing the difference. It was one world, whole. But as the Erdtree's influence grew, something subtle began to happen. Distances stretched, fog thickened, landmarks shifted. Roads ended where they once continued. The land of shadow was not shattered or sunk. It was obscured, veiled, disconnected, not erased, hidden, like a memory deliberately buried, like a shame too heavy to display. Why Marika chose to do this remains uncertain. Perhaps it was inevitable, a consequence of creating a system that demanded balance. If light expands, shadow must retreat. If order rises, chaos is pushed aside. Or perhaps it was deliberate, because there were things in the land of shadow that Marika did not wish the world to see. The gate of divinity, the truth of her ascension, the culture she had betrayed, the blood she had spilled to become eternal, proof that gold had not always been righteous, proof that gods too began as something smaller, something mortal, and someone else, a child. From the moment Marika became a goddess, duality defined her reign. Gold and shadow, order and suppression, life and death. Even Marika herself was not singular. Radagon existed alongside her, not merely a consort, not merely a second ruler, but a counterpart. A god already divided. Perhaps that division was always there. Perhaps godhood simply made it visible. And from this divided existence came children, some blessed by grace, some shaped by curses, some reflecting light, some reflecting what light rejected. One of them would be hidden away. Messmer, born with fire coiled inside him, not golden flame, not cleansing radiance, but something deeper. Older, a serpent of abyssal fire that did not obey. Flame that consumed without discrimination. Flame that remembered a time before order. It hissed in his blood, moved beneath his skin. A living thing, watching, waiting. He embodied everything Marika feared. Power without restraint. Flame without hierarchy. Destruction without purpose. Not gold, not grace, but something primal, something dangerously close to the world. To contain him, she sealed his eye with grace itself. A brand, masquerading as a blessing. A chain disguised as protection, light forced over fire. And then she sent him away. Far from the Erdtree, far from the court, far from the eyes of those who might question why a goddess bore such a son. The land of shadow became his prison, a place already filled with the unwanted, the forgotten, the rejected. There his existence would not contradict her perfect order. There he could be useful, out of sight, but not before she gave him a purpose, because Marika never wasted anything, not even her own children. If he must burn, then let him burn what remained of her past. If he must destroy, let him destroy the evidence. And so she handed him a command. Simple. Final. A holy justification for exile. A crusade. Long before the crusade, another important character entered the frame. She was simply a princess. A daughter of Carrier. A child of moonlight. And a sister. In those distant years, the manor of the Carrions stood quiet beneath the night sky, its towers silvered by starlight and reflected in still waters. It was a place where magic did not roar like flame, but whispered, where knowledge was studied patiently, where sorcery was not conquest, but understanding. It was here the two sisters once gazed upward together, Rellana and Rellana. They were said to have witnessed something rare as children, an overlapping vision in the sky. Two moons, not merely phases, not illusion, but twin presences. One full and luminous, the other subtle, quieter, almost hidden. Rellana fixed her heart on the full moon, vast, complete, eternal. But Rellana, the smaller light, the half-seen one, the moon that existed beside another, where her sister sought wholeness. Rellana, two lights sharing one sky, two forces existing together, would become the quiet theme of her life. As she grew, her path diverged from Rellana's. Rellana became a scholar, a master of glintstone, a queen. Rellana became something else, a knight. She trained not only in sorcery, but in the blade, steel and spell together, precision, discipline, graceful lethality. Where other nobles commanded from afar, Rellana fought at the front. She studied under Count Emir, the high priest, learning the older rites of moon sorcery. Incantations that treated the stars not as tools, but as truths to be interpreted. Yet even Emir would one day abandon that faith, claiming the moon was nothing divine, only the nearest celestial body. To him, the mystery faded, but not for Rellana. For her, the moon never lost meaning. If anything, it deepened. She became renowned among the Carrion Knights, decorated, respected, a warrior who blended elegance with devastating skill. Her chosen armament was unusual, a thrusting shield used in ritual combat at the Colosseum. There, knights proved loyalty through controlled violence, through trials of endurance and resolve. It was not spectacle, it was devotion. And Rellana endured every trial without hesitation, not for glory, not for praise, but because loyalty to her was sacred. Once she chose a path, she did not stray from it. Then came Messmer, the son of Marika, one marked by flame. Where Renalla's court valued moonlight and reflection, Messmer was something harsher, direct, burning, unforgiving, a crusader. He did not speak of philosophy or stars. He spoke of purpose, of cleansing, of duty to a cause greater than oneself. To many, he was frightening. To Rellana, he was certain. And certainty has its own gravity. Where others hesitated, she stepped forward. Where others questioned, she accepted. Perhaps she saw in him another form of duality, flame beside moonlight. Opposites that should not coexist, and yet did. The same way two moons once shared the sky. So she made her choice, not forced, not commanded, chosen. Rellana abandoned her birthright, a princess who stepped away from inheritance, from safety, from her sister's side. She would not rule Raya Lucaria, would not sit in halls of learning. Instead, she followed Messmer into exile, into shadow. Before departing, Rennala did not curse her, did not forbid her. Their bond remained, quiet, unbroken. As a final gift, Rennala gave her something simple. A lock of lustrous black hair, a sister's token, a memory to carry into darkness. Rellana kept it always. Even knights who surrender everything carry one small light. Messmer then entered the land of shadows. He came with banners, with orders, with purpose, a commander at the head of an army, a son carrying out his mother's will. Before the ash, before the ruins, before his name became something whispered like a curse, there was still loyalty in him, still belief. Born with fire bound within him, Messmer never knew silence. Even as a child, heat clung to his skin, breath steamed in winter air, candles guttered when he passed, metal warmed beneath his hands. The flame was not something he wielded, it lived in him, coiled behind his ribs like a second heart, a slow, constant burning that never truly slept. Again and again, he wished to be rid of it. He trained until exhaustion, hoping discipline might smother it. He knelt in prayer, asking the Erdtree to cleanse it. He wrapped his body in bindings and armor to cage the heat, but the fire never faded. It flickered brighter, hungry, waiting. Others looked at him with awe or fear. Neither comforted him. Because Messmer did not feel chosen, he felt cursed, and so Marika gave it purpose. If something cannot be removed, it can be directed. She spoke not as a distant goddess, but as a mother. Her voice calm, certain, gentle. The world, she said, still carried stains of the old age, remnants of chaos, of cruelty, of suffering that refused to die. The land of shadow, a place untouched by grace, a place where the crucible's tangled life still festered. If her order was to be complete, that land had to be cleansed, and only his fire could do it. To be needed is a powerful thing, stronger than love, stronger than doubt. Messmer accepted. She commanded him to lead a crusade, to purge the land of shadow of those who lived without grace, to erase the remnants of a world that existed before gold. The Hauntsant became his target. To Messmer and his followers, this was not conquest, it was doctrine. Those without the light of gold were impure. Those untouched by grace were unfinished. Those bound to the crucible were remnants of a flawed beginning, and flawed things they were taught must be burned away. Fire purifies, fire renews, fire leaves nothing behind. And Messmer obeyed. He did not arrive with saints. He did not march with holy knights or radiant heroes. His army was something else entirely. Prisoners promised freedom. Outcasts offered purpose. Criminals given a choice between execution and service. Men and women bound by fear rather than faith. People with nothing left to lose. They followed because the alternative was worse. Because survival often looks like loyalty from a distance. Above them marched the Fire Knights. Aristocrats. Nobles. warriors of pedigree. They chose Messmer over the Erdtree, chose flame over grace. Perhaps they believed in him. Perhaps they feared him. Perhaps they simply saw opportunity in destruction. Whatever the reason, their choice cost them everything. The Golden Order shunned them. Names erased from lineage, titles stripped, history rewritten. But still they marched, and together they brought ruin. Messmer's army needed commanders, warriors who would not falter. Rellana became his blade, his most trusted lieutenant. They began to call her the Sword of Messmer. Her weapons changed to reflect her new life. Twin blades, one infused with Carrion moon sorcery, the other with Messmer's flame, cold light and burning fire. Together, the only place such opposites could coexist. Not blended, not diluted, simply side by side, like the twin moons of her childhood, like the sister she left behind, like the man she chose to follow. Her entire life expressed in steel. She led the conquest of Castle Ensis, a critical stronghold, the gateway to the Scadutree. Without it, Messmer's campaign would stall. With it, the crusade could continue. Rellana did not hesitate. She commanded with calm precision, her knights advancing beneath moonlit sigils while flame marched beside them. Later, at Morth Ruins, she shattered the linchpin stone with lunar sorcery, triggering a landslide that buried much of the Hornson settlement. It was decisive, efficient, terrible. War rarely feels heroic when seen up close. If this was the path she chose, she would walk it fully. The Hornson settlements fell one by one. First the outer villages, then the temples, then the spiraled cities that had stood for centuries. Sacred towers were shattered, stone cracked and collapsed like brittle bone under bombardment. Spiral monuments, once symbols of ascent, burned like funeral pyres. Smoke curled upward, mocking the shapes they once revered. Divine beast dancers, once worshipped as living vessels of godly power, were hunted through forests and ravines. Feathers torn, masks shattered, their ritual movements reduced to stumbling retreats. Some fought, some prayed, some simply stood still, refusing to abandon their faith even as flames swallowed them. Messmer watched it all through the slits of his helm, silent, unmoving. Fire answered his command without hesitation. Where he pointed, cities vanished. Where he walked, ash followed. To ensure nothing survived, his forces deployed furnace columns, towering constructs fueled by thick black sap drawn from the Scadutree. Massive, groaning, endless. Their flames did not merely kill, they clung, they seeped, they burned body and soul alike. Ash that should have scattered remained heavy. Spirits that should have risen were trapped. This was not war, it was erasure. Annihilation so complete that memory itself struggled to remain. And yet, Messmer did not revel in it. There were no cheers, no triumph, no speeches, only the steady crackle of fire. His armor tells a quiet truth. Blackened, scarred, heavy, more like a coffin than a crown. He became a symbol of terror only because his mother demanded it. Every city he razed, every culture he erased, every child who fled at the sight of his banner, it was done in obedience. Because if this suffering created a better world, then it had to mean something. It had to. But obedience does not erase guilt. At night, when the fires died low, the screams remained, echoing, lingering. Some said they heard whispers in the smoke, names of the dead, curses carried on embers. Even the fire knights grew quiet, even the prisoners stopped pretending this was salvation. As the crusade dragged on, the realization set in. There would be no return, no messengers from the Erdtree, no blessings of grace, no path home. The land of shadow remained sealed, cut off, like a wound stitched shut. Soldiers whispered around dying campfires. Ghosts begged Marika to call her son back. They prayed, they waited. She never answered. Days became months. Months became years. The sky never changed, and slowly a terrible thought spread through the ranks. They had not been sent to conquer, they had been sent away. Messmer had been abandoned, and with him, everyone who followed. Devotion curdled into resentment, resentment into hatred. Statues of Marika were beheaded, her likeness defaced. Golden symbols smashed into dust, faith turned brittle, hope withered. The Fire Knight stopped speaking her name, and Messmer said nothing at all, because somewhere deep within, he understood his flame, his birth, his very existence. He was never meant to inherit the Order, never meant to stand beside her. He was the weapon she could not keep near the throne. Too dangerous, too volatile, too reminiscent of something older. The crusade was a pretense, a cleansing, yes, but also a burial, a way to erase her past and seal her feared son away forever. In the end, there was nothing left to burn. Only ash, only ghosts, only silence. And when the truth settled fully in his chest, he did not rage, did not scream. He simply accepted it, like he had accepted everything else. Despite being abandoned, Messmer remains tragically loyal to Marika, holding his position at the top of the Shadow Keep in a dark chamber, awaiting a sign or command that never comes, but it seemed like. The land of Shadow was forgotten, but not by everyone. Someone else had been watching, someone whose presence had been felt long before his arrival, through whispers, through enchantments, through the subtle bending of will. Miquella. From the moment Miquella was born, his fate diverged from every other demigod. Even among the children of Marika, beings already touched by divinity, already distant from ordinary life, there was something unusual about him. He did not grow. Years passed. Seasons turned. Wars rose and fell. And still his body remained small, unchanged. A child. Forever. Cursed with eternal youth. His flesh refused maturity. But his mind did not share that weakness. His thoughts sharpened early. His understanding deepened quickly, while other demigods chased glory. Trained for conquest. Or obsessed over inheritance and power. Miquella watched. He listened. He learned. He noticed what others ignored. The servants who aged without rest. The soldiers who never truly died. The spirits that lingered too long beneath the Erdtree's glow. The Golden Order promised eternity. But eternity, he realized, was not mercy. It was accumulation, pain that could not fade, grief that could not pass, lives extended long past their natural end. Marika's world was eternal, but it was stagnant. The removal of destined death had halted the natural cycle. Life endured, yes, but it did not renew. Nothing truly ended, and because nothing ended, nothing could truly heal. Souls lingered like dust in still air. Wars left scars that never closed, suffering layered upon suffering until the world itself felt heavy. The Erdtree shone brilliantly above it all. Radiant, majestic, golden. But to Miquella, it began to resemble something else. Not a blessing, a system. A machine designed to preserve existence indefinitely, even when that existence hurt. Miquella did not reject order, he rejected immobility. Order should guide life forward, not trap it in place. His earliest efforts were gentle. He did not rebel. He experimented, quietly, carefully. If the Golden Order was flawed, perhaps it could be corrected, improved. He began with gold, not ordinary gold, but something purer, unalloyed gold, metal stripped of influence, free from outer gods, free from interference, a substance that answered only to itself. With it he forged needles and charms, Small things, precise things, tools meant not to dominate, but to protect. He attempted to cure Melinia's rot, not suppress it, not weaponize it, not accept it as inevitable. He sought to remove it entirely, to free her, because to him, suffering was not sacred. It was simply a problem waiting to be solved. But the rot endured. The outer influence was deeper than expected. Unalloyed gold resisted it, yet could not erase it. For the first time, Miquella failed, and from that failure, he learned something crucial. The Golden Order could not be fixed from within. Its foundations were too rigid, too absolute. Any attempt to change it was rejected, like a body rejecting a foreign organ. So he did what few demigods would ever dare. He walked away, leaving behind his status, his lineage, his place beside the Erdtree. His next attempt rose quietly in the north. The Erdtree, a new Erdtree grown without Marika's design, not a symbol of law, a refuge, a sanctuary for the unwanted, the cursed, the graceless, the malformed, the forgotten, albinorics, misbegotten, those cast aside by golden perfection. They gathered around him willingly, not because he demanded obedience, but because he offered kindness. And kindness, in that age, was rare. The Erdtree grew, branches wide, roots deep, but it remained incomplete. It could shelter life, yet it could not define an age. It lacked authority, lacked the metaphysical weight that only a god could provide. To reshape the world completely, Miquella would need godhood. And godhood required three things: a divine threshold, a vessel of death, and a lord. The threshold he already knew, the gate of divinity. The same gate Marika had once used to ascend, but the land of shadow lay outside grace, severed from normal passage, a place the Erdtree's light refused to touch. No blessing could guide the way. Only death crossed that boundary freely. So Miquella planned his own, not as suicide, but as transit. He allowed himself to be taken by Mog, allowed the Omen Lord to believe he had found a divine consort. Mog thought it destiny, thought himself chosen, thought love or blood or fate had delivered Miquella into his hands, but Mog misunderstood something fundamental. He was never the master of this story. He was the tool. His blood, tainted by Omen curse and stripped of grace, could slip through barriers the Erdtree maintained. Through Mog's body, through suppressed death itself, Miquella crossed into the land of shadow, a quiet descent, like falling asleep. And there, his true design began. Every god requires a lord, not merely a champion, an anchor, a force that stabilizes the age. Marika had Godfrey. Later Radagon. Miquella needed his own, and he had already chosen Radagon. Not chosen for strength alone, though his strength was unmatched. Radagon was chosen for stasis. He had bound the stars themselves, pinned fate in place, frozen destiny. As long as Radagon lived, the heavens did not move, and as long as the stars were bound, certain futures could never occur, including Miquella's ascension. Radagon did not oppose him out of malice. He simply refused to yield. A general to the end, faithful, immovable, a wall against change itself. So Miquella made a final calculation. Radagon would not serve willingly, but Radagon's death could still serve the plan. The festival at Redmane was no coincidence. The rot that consumed him was no accident. Events aligned too perfectly. Radagon fell, and when he fell, the stars moved again. Fate resumed its slow turning. Only then could Miquella proceed. In the land of shadow, he shed what remained of himself, his flesh, his childhood form, his name, each piece discarded like old clothing. What remained was intent, pure, focused, unwavering. His followers gathered, not commanded, but drawn. Charm replaced force, devotion replaced fear. They loved him, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Which perhaps is far more dangerous. Miquella prepared to cross the gate of divinity, to begin an age built not on fear or stagnation, but gentle guidance, a kinder order, a softer eternity. But something intervened. You, the tarnished, another who crossed through death, another who reached the land of shadow, another variable he had not fully accounted for. Rellana slain in the castle Ensis while protecting the path towards his lord and love. Messmer confronted in the Shadow Keep, fallen and gone while cursing his mother. Miquella was struck down while he was on the back of a consort with the ambitions of ascension. Miquella's vision was not cruel, but it was absolute. A god who decides what may end, still decides what may exist. Even mercy becomes tyranny when it is universal. And so his perfect design met resistance. Not hatred, not evil, simply choice. In the end, Miquella's age never fully dawned. Not because it was monstrous, not because it was wrong, but because no single will, no matter how gentle, can define freedom for all. And so Miquella's long design concludes, not in triumph, not in catastrophe, but in quiet interruption. A perfect plan, carefully measured across centuries, left unrealized, like a dream that fades just before waking. Then, at last, the story folds back in on itself, not with a roar, not with the fall of a god that shakes the heavens, but with something far quieter. The same quiet that existed before the Erdtree, before gold, before order. The quiet of wind moving through empty stone. Because when everything ends in the land of shadow, there is no fanfare, only stillness. When Miquella falls, nothing immediately changes. There is no collapsing sky, no great light extinguished, no proclamation carried on divine thunder. The Scadutree does not wither. The Erdtree does not dim. The world does not acknowledge what almost happened. And that is the strangest part. For someone who planned so carefully, who moved kingdoms like pieces on a board, who sacrificed his own body, his own name, his own childhood, history barely stirs. His dream dissolves like mist in morning air, as though it had never been there at all. And yet, if you listen closely, the land of shadow feels different. Not healed, not redeemed, just tired. The crusade has ended, the flames have burned themselves out, the banners have rotted into threads. Where Messmer's legions once marched, only footprints hardened into mud remain. Furnace golems stand silent and hollow, their sap long dried, their fires cold. Castle walls crumble without anyone left to defend or assault them. The divine beast masks lie half buried in ash. Helmets stare upward with empty eyes. Prayer cloths flap against broken spirals. No hymns, no drums, no dancers, just wind. The Haunsant are gone. Not defeated. Gone. Their towers shattered, their faith erased, their names forgotten by the very order that feared them. And yet the land still curves in spirals, roots still coil, stone still refuses to grow straight, as if the crucible remembers, as if nature itself never accepted Marika's corrections. Life, stubborn as ever, continues in strange ways. Small flowers bloom through cracked stone, animals nest in ruined temples, moss claims the steps of Enerilium. The world goes on, it always does. Gods rise, gods fall, but grass still grows. At the top of the Shadow Keep, Messmer's chamber finally knows silence. For so long it held a single thing. Waiting. Not rage. Not rebellion. Just waiting. A son who believed, truly believed that if he obeyed long enough, if he burned enough, if he sacrificed enough, his mother would call him home, that there would be a sign, a word, a whisper of grace. None ever came. his entire life reduced to a command that no longer mattered. And when he falls, it is not the death of a tyrant. It is the death of a weapon, a blade left too long in the rain, rusting, forgotten, still pointed at enemies that no longer exist. Perhaps that is the cruelest fate in all the lands between. Not hatred, not defeat, but abandonment. Messmer was never evil, never monstrous. He was simply useful. And once his usefulness ended, so did Marika's love. In another life, he might have been a knight, a brother. Rellana's story ends even softer. No throne, no legend, no song sung in Rylukaria's halls. Only a knight who chose loyalty once and never chose again. She followed Messmer not because she was deceived, but because she believed that devotion meant standing beside someone even when the world turned away, believed that duty mattered more than safety, believed that two opposing lights could exist together. Moon and flame, gentleness and destruction, love and war. Her twin blades told that story better than words ever could. And when she falls, those blades finally separate. Cold moonlight fading, fire dying out. Like the twin moons she once saw as a child, no longer sharing the same sky. Somewhere far away, perhaps Rellana still gazes upward at night, unaware that the sister she gifted a simple lock of hair to will never return. History rarely records the faithful, only the victorious. And Miquella, sweet, terrifying Miquella, the kindest of them all, the one who never sought conquest, never sought worship, only improvement, only relief, only a gentler world. Yet even he could not escape the oldest truth of power. To decide what is best for everyone is still to decide for them. Even mercy becomes a cage when it is absolute. Even love can smother. His age promised no suffering, no abandonment, no stagnation. But it would still have been his will. His design. His definition of happiness. And somewhere inevitably, someone would not fit. Someone would be corrected. Someone would be guided a little too firmly. Because gods do not ask, they shape. That is their nature. Marika shaped the world with gold. Miquella would have shaped it with kindness. But both are still hands around the throat of fate. The tarnished, the one who walks through death and shadow alike, does something no god does. You choose. Messy, imperfect, human. You break cycles not with plans spanning centuries, but with simple refusal. Refusal to kneel. Refusal to accept a single ordained future. And that is why every grand design fails. Because life is not orderly, not pure, not gentle. It is chaotic, contradictory, alive, just like the crucible once was. So the land of shadow remains, not restored, not redeemed, just remembered. A place where the past was buried, because it did not fit a prettier story. A place that proves the Erdtree was never the beginning, only a replacement. Proof that before order, there was something wilder, something honest, something that allowed life to simply become. Perhaps that is why the land still feels sacred, not holy in the way temples are holy, but holy in the way forests are, in the way storms are, in the way birth and death happen without permission. The crucible was never evil. It was merely uncontrolled, and maybe that frightened gods more than anything else, because something that grows freely cannot be ruled. In the end, nothing is truly erased. Not the Hornson, not the shamans, not Messmer, not Rellana, not Miquella, not even Marika. Their choices ripple outward forever, through ruins, through ash, through you. Every step across the land of shadow is a step across memory, across mistakes, across abandoned dreams. It is history made physical. A reminder that every golden age casts a shadow somewhere. And that shadow waits, patient. Quiet until someone walks through it again. Not to conquer, not to cleanse, but simply to witness, to remember. Because sometimes that is all the dead ever wanted. Not salvation, not revenge, just to be remembered. Before the Erdtree cast its golden light, life simply was. And after gods rise and fall, after orders are written and shattered, after every grand design collapses under its own certainty, life still simply is. Roots still twist, storms still gather, spirals still climb toward a sky that does not answer, and somewhere beneath both gold and shadow, the world keeps turning, untamed, unfinished, alive. Thank you for listening to Games Lore to Sleep. If you enjoyed drifting through the complete lore of Elden Ring, Shadow of the Erdtree, you can gently support the channel by liking this video and subscribing for more long-form game lore made to help you rest. There's no rush, no need to stay awake. Just let the story fade and sleep well.